Monograms are one of the oldest forms of branding. It was popularized in the late 1800s through the process of artistic engravings that were printed for both personal and commercial use. It's still a fun format to use on logo designs today, so let's take a look at how you can create your own unique monogram. Now, this isn't an approach graphically that I take all the time, but when the occasion arises within the context of a branding project and it's a good fit, then I always jump on it. In this case, the client I was working with, the name of the company is called Circadian Company, and so it had two C's in the name, which lends itself to a monogram. So I wanted to create a nice, unique kind of brand mark with a monogram as the center spot, and this was the base art that I did that with. Now, to do monograms, to do simple overlaps, I just select the shapes here that make up both of the C's. I'll go to Object, I'll go to Path, I'll go to Offset Path, and then on this, it'll just depend on how big this mark is in context. But for example here, we're going to go 4 points, and you can test it to see if that's going to work here, and I think it is. So we'll go OK. Now, I'm going to go to my graphic styles just so you can see what's going on. I'm going to colorize these just as an outline so it'll make more sense. We'll zoom in so we can see what we're working on here. And I'm going to take this outline, and this just needs to be on top so we can see how it's interacting with the letter forms. Now, on this, I want this C that's kind of facing to the right to overlap the other C. So I'm going to take the outline I created based off of that shape, and I don't need everything. I just need the area it's going to overlap. So I'll create a throwaway shape like this, and then I'll use the Pathfinder with intersect to isolate just that area. And then on the other C shape outline, I want that to overlap the corresponding C going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to just isolate that area and do the same by intersecting it with the Pathfinder. Now, this gives me the shapes needed to shape build overlap detailing. So I'll take this shape and select this C, and then I'll remove from that shape using Pathfinder to create the in shape that I want. And I'll do the same thing on this letter C, and I'll punch through it like this, and you can see that it creates a simple little monogram overlap, and it just adds a lot more dynamic to this design by adding those little overlaps. It makes it more interesting. There's a lot more interplay going on, and the more detailed you get with a monogram, the cooler this effect really looks. Now, in the final brand system context for this design, this was both the vertical and horizontal direction I presented to the company. It is actually my personal favorite of the ones I pitched to them. Now, moving forward with more monogram work, you can get more illustrative and ornate with it. So we're going to take a look at a slightly different approach. We'll use some of the same methodology, but we're going to realize that we, at times, can use a symmetric format in order to create a more elaborate design. In this case, I only have to create these 2 or 3 areas of art to form everything else needed in this design. This is kind of the beauty of it. And once I have this one created, I don't need to clone this again. That's going to just stay where it's at. I'm just going to select these little dots, select this little ornament piece here, and I'm going to clone it, Command-C, Command-F, or if you have the F key set up, F3. And I'll use the reflect tool, and we'll click on a center spot, and I'm just reflecting this up. And so we're making basically a backward C shape right now. You could think of it like that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of this inner content that makes up this C artwork, and I don't want to select this part. We don't need that, just this. And I'm going to fuse it all together with the Unite feature in Pathfinder like this. And now that I have this created, I can now simply reflect this. So we'll go ahead and clone it, Command-C, Command-F. And I'll take the reflect tool, find the center point on this design, which is actually based off of this circle. So you could do it there. And we'll flip it like this. Now, I just realized I actually didn't need to reflect these dots, so I can get rid of them because we just have a set that's floating underneath there, so we don't need that. So I'll select these dots, and I'm going to unite them to this. And now we have two pieces of artwork. It's the same project, Circadian Company. We've just have made more elaborate, ornate, if you will, C shapes. And we're going to do the same type of approach where we select both of these, and we're going to offset them by going to Object Path, Offset. In this case, we will try a little wider than what we had before. And I think that's going to work. Just so we can see what's going on, let's go ahead and colorize these. We'll make this one blue, and we'll make this one just temporarily. We'll make this one a brown type color like this. Now we're going to zoom in so we can see what we're doing here. And we're going to take the overlap of this shape. Once again, we only have to focus on the area that it's going to be overlapping. We don't need everything. So we'll just draw a throwaway shape that we can basically select with the offset that we created, and then we can intersect it with Pathfinder to just get the shape we need to create the overlap we're after. And then I'll do the same thing down below, just isolate the area we need and use intersect to create the overlap we need. And on this one, we can get rid of that shape. We don't need that. Okay, now that we have these, we can use it to add the nice overlap. So select the overlap shape, select the C, and punch it out using Pathfinder. And then we'll do the same thing on the corresponding C like this. And we'll add that kind of detail in there. So this is how I would create another motif based off of this same format of overlapping and monograms. Now, on this particular one, the final one ended up looking like this with the background colored, and in its final brand system context, this is how this came out. And I think this one has a nice beauty factor to it, so it was a good exploration and iteration to present to the client. Now, on a more complex monogram, here's a good example of that. On the left, you have a very basic composition of an overlap. It's flat colors, easy to understand, and these two characters are interacting in such a way that we want to create the illusion that they're kind of bound together. And so if I select these shapes that we created with the offset path and I select the P, we can punch through this, and then I can select these shapes and punch through the ornate D. And so what you get is this nice interplay of these letters kind of wrapping and intertwining with one another. And that works great on a flat motif. It's pretty easy to discern. Now, if you get more illustrative with your letter forms like this, and you have more detail, like we've added this dimensional aspect to the letter so it looks a little offset. We have some inset detail. We have some thick and thins. And if I go to the keyline view, you can see that these are all strokes with shapes and fills. And so it gets very complex. We can't simply use Pathfinder to punch through it. So how would I add this same dynamic to this type of design? Well, this is where masking will come in. So if I turn this layer off and turn a layer on above it, you can see I have a copy of this D shape right here, but I have my masking set up. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to select the masking that we've set up. We're going to select the character, and we're going to mask it. And to mask something, you go to Object, Clipping Mask, or Make. You can see I have an F3 key set up. It's kind of nice. I can just have both selected, hit F3, and it masks it. I can hit F2, and it'll unmask it. So that's a nice feature. Once again, if you want to know more about keyboard shortcuts, check out my original Drawing Vector Graphics course. I go over how to set those up. I use them all the time. It just makes the process faster. I don't have to go up here and pull down and click on a menu item. And with that masked, if I turn on the layer below it now, we now have the illusion that it is going to overlap. Now, I wouldn't want to set up my final art that way, but for a comp, it's perfectly acceptable. But you would actually want to build it out into shapes for your final art if you're going to use this methodology. Now, in the final context of this design, this was for Printers Distillery. This was a branding idea for them in my exploration for that project and how they could handle their labeling to actually look like it was turn of the century of sorts. Now, the next one I want to go over is a little more complex, and this involves 3 letter forms, not just 2. And there's a principle that's really easy to understand, and if you just remember it, it's going to make it easy to discern where to add in your overlaps, where one letter will overlap the next letter. In this case, we're going to focus on the letter T here, and we're going to go to Object, Path, Offset Path, and we're going to do this at 6. We'll go OK. Now, so that you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to go to Graphic Styles and color this so you can see it. So you can see it now, offset 6 points. And now a principle you want to keep in mind, if you want the T to start, you just make the decision, is it going to overlap on the first pass as it goes over the S, or is it going to go under? In this case, I want it to overlap. So we know we're going to have a section that's going to be isolated here that'll overlap. On the E, it's going to go underneath. And then on the S, again, it's going to go over the top. So we'll have overlap here. We'll create that. It's going to go under the E and once again over the S. So we'll put a shape down here. I'll select these 3 shapes and I'll go to Pathfinder and I'll unite them. And now with those, I can select this outline shape, intersect them, and this gives me the final shape that I can then select the S and I can remove from shape to start creating this overlap effect. And this is the principle I'll use on all of this. And the nice thing about this is on the S now, because it goes under the T, the next letter, it's going to go over the T. So that's all you need to remember. Wherever it starts at, the corresponding overlap is going to be opposite of it. So this goes under the T. So this S shape will go over the E, in which case we just do the same principle of a path, offset path of 6. And once again, so you can see it, we'll color it this. And I don't need all these shapes, so I'll just tap into isolation mode, get rid of what I don't need. And now I'll just isolate the area it's going to overlap, select this shape, intersect it with Pathfinder, and then if I punch this out of the E shape, it starts to create that illusion and overlap that you see here. Now that it goes under the T, over the E, under the T again, it's going to go over the E down here. So I'd create the overlap for that area. And then I'd start working on the T and figure out, well, here it's under. So as it gets here, I want it to go over at this point on the T itself. So when it's all said and done, we have a base overlap that shows it like this with all the letter forms. Now, I really like how this is coming out. And the more I was looking at it, I was thinking, I want to add some dimensionality to it. And so I'm just going to turn on this simple modeling that I did for it, and it really breathed life to this overall design. And this is just simple shapes. I've just taken these shapes, and if I double click into the isolation mode, you can see it's just dividing each of these shapes in half, and then I've just applied a nice gradient to it on some of these for like the curves here. And if you go to the gradient, you can see the gradient goes from a darker hue of this base color, which is this gold, and it's a tint of it, and it blends to nothing. So it creates that nice illusion of a beveling on these letter forms. Now, the final context for this design was for a logo mark for T.S. Eliot Society, which is a society that loves the writing and poetry of T.S. Eliot. So do I. So this was the inspiration for this design, I should say. Now, I use this not all the time because I don't have the opportunity to do a monogram approach on a lot of things, but when the opportunity does arise, I always jump on it. Here's a beverage company that I created their branding for. This is an encapsulated logo, but within it, I have a nice little monogram design of R&B worked out, which also works and serves the purpose of a secondary branding graphic as well in a bottle cap kind of nested shape. So technically, a monogram isn't a logo type, but this type of logo design is a fun one to design and build. So give this process a try and see what you can create for your own projects.